Okay, welcome back. Today I'm going to talk about modes, and we're also going to talk about the World Outliner over here as a way of showing you how the Unreal Engine is laid out. There are 5 basic modes for working in this game. The first one is called Place, and what you'll see is if you click on each one of those as you go through there we go through there, things change. Okay, you can see everything down here changes. Place, you'll notice that it says recently placed, and it has basic, lights, visual effects, BSP, volumes, and all classes. And then it shows you a list of all of these elements that are possible to be placed in here. Now, for example, if I would like to place a cube in here, all I need to do is click on that, drag it out here, and let it go. Again, my movement, right click allows me to rotate. Left click and right click together, I move up and down, and the left click allows me to move to zoom in and zoom out. All right, then you can see it's placed it, this object here, I've got some X, Y, and Z position arrows, the pivot point this is called, and I can select that and I can drag it up, and you'll notice that there's like snapping going on, and I'm going to talk about these things right here in a moment separately because they're really important. So any of these things that are over there, I can click and drag out. If I want to add another light, there are some 4 basic lights. If I want a visual effect, such as fog, or a reflection, which is like a mirror that allows things to be shiny and reflective, I can just click on them and drag them out and do that. BSP are a little bit different. This is basically an asset that is a 3D model. This was created in a 3D program, and it was imported, and it was left in there as a box. And I can scale it up or down. I can rotate it, I can do a lot of things to it, but basically that's all that it will ever be, is a box. Whether I make it into a rectangle or not, that's not changing it. But if I wanted rounded corners, or if I wanted this thing to have something, maybe another section growing out of it, I can't do anything with these basic shapes. Those are all 3D objects that have been brought in: cone, cylinder, sphere, things like that. BSP, however, we're going to cover in a separate thing. This is called geometry. And when I bring geometry in, like for example a box, if I click it and drag it in, you'll notice that I get this red outline on it. And when I let go of it, it becomes, looks like the ground plane right there. It's got that texture on it. That's what that is. It's a material that looks like a checkerboard. And this is an editable object. If I would like to divide this in half and extrude part of it out, I've got some tools here I'm going to show you in a second to go in and do that. But that's the basic difference between those two things. This is a pre-made model. This is one I am building in here. The importance of geometry or brushes, which is really what BSP stands for, is a brush. This is a kind of the appendix of an older version of this program. Nowadays, we don't use these things like we used to. A version back in the Unreal 3 days, bringing in assets was kind of an iffy situation. If you were building a world, you would sketch everything out, build everything out, kind of do a rough estimate of where everything was going to go using geometry. Nowadays, we can do that with assets. They actually work a whole lot better. So if I'm building something, if I'm going to build a world and I'm going to have a big building, I'm probably going to build that building in a 3D program, and I'm going to bring it in modular pieces, which is what we're going to do this semester. And I can snap pieces together, and I can build an entire building fairly quickly out of using the same 5 or 6 pieces, a window and a door and some wall panels. I can do it very quickly, and it's going to work just as well as these. These do have some drawbacks to them, which I'll talk a little bit more about when I actually do something on geometry. Then we have some volumes over here. Volumes are the tricks of the trade. If I would like to change, a volume is a box that you can walk into and you can have an effect occur within that box. That's basically what's happening. So you'll see there's blocking volumes. A blocking volume I can put in an environment. The character cannot walk through it. It acts as an invisible barrier. Camera blocking, a camera can't go through a wall or a door, which normally it can do. There's a kill volume. If I were to go in here as a character and play this level and step off of this floor, I would fall to my death. And the kill zone determines how long I fall. until I actually die and respawn. So there are a lot of these things in here, and we'll go through these things separately during the course of the semester as well. And then all classes just shows you everything, and you'll see there's a lot of things in here like the sky sphere. I can select that sphere up there, which is really what it is, it's a giant sphere that has a texture on it, and I can delete that and put my own in if that's what I want to do. So we'll come back and look at that. The second one over here is paint. Now, paint we're going to cover separately as well. Painting is kind of cool. Painting is how I can go in and say, for example, when we start talking about materials, materials are very, the term we use is expensive in terms of processing power. The more complicated a material is, the more expensive it is, the more processing power it takes up, and the harder it is to use and to have them render the way you want them. So what I can do is I can actually go in and I can create objects that have multiple textures on there, and I can use the paint tools to paint different things. For example, let's say I want this to be a stucco wall. But I want it to be an old stucco wall, and I want to be able to see random areas where the bricks are showing through because the stucco is chipped off or things like that. I can create an object like that, and you can see what happens. I've clicked on that thing, and now my tools have kind of changed here. That what I can do is I can set this up using the paint tools. So I put down a main texture, in this particular case it would be stucco, and then I can go back and using the tools in here is I can paint little areas where they would show brick coming through, and it looks to be a complicated material, but it's actually really easy. But it's much better than trying to create something that contained a pre-made texture already on it. And I'll explain more about that. That didn't come across clearly. Trust me, we're going to do a whole example of working with painting tools and how to do this and why it works so well. I have a landscape tool over here. The mode for landscaping is going to allow me to create a giant landscape, and I can paint not only hills or mountains or valleys or whatever I would like. I can also go back and paint textures on it, and we'll be doing that. There is a foliage tool in here. The foliage tool is an awesome tool to use. This is going to allow me to take models of trees or models of grass or plants or bushes or whatever I wanted it to be, and it can go beyond foliage. It's a kind of a misnomer. It's used mostly for foliage, but it's going to allow me to paint on areas and put down foliage or things like maybe broken sticks or tree stumps or rocks or elements like that, things I want laying around. I want them to be random. This allows me to achieve a level of randomness. I can pick a random range for the size of trees and bushes. I can pick a random range for the rotation of them, the distortion of them. There's a lot of different things I can do, and it's great. It is a little heavy on the processing power, but we're going to show you some tricks for getting away from that, so you can use these, and it works really well. The last one over here is the edit tool. This allows me to do geometry editing. That brush right there, if I go back and click on it, when I am in this menu, you can see it is now lit up. If I go back to the original menu, it doesn't look like that. Come back over to here, it changes. This is going to allow me to do things like I can split this box, I can delete parts of it, I can chamfer an edge, which is going to make this thing look a little bit more cut off. There's a lot of different things that I can do to it, and this works on any of those elements that you see here under that. The cone, the cylinder, the different staircases, or the sphere, I can open them up and I can edit them using those particular tools. All right, so those are the basic elements, and we're going to go through. I'll cover each of them specifically later on. This is more or less an introductory video. Now, over here on the right, we have the World Outliner, and we also have your details and world settings. The World Outliner is a list of everything that you have in your world. Now, you can see I added that geometry that was in there. I'll go back over here to this menu so I can take it and I can move it and I can delete it just by hitting delete. I can take that object and I can delete it. And you'll notice if I select it, it shows up here in my World Outliner. If I delete it, it goes away. This is a list of everything in there. And you can see the basic elements that are in a world, technically a blank world. I've got a skylight. I have a sky sphere. I have a player start. That's that object right there. I have a light source, which is that one right here. I have the atmospheric fog, which is right there. We'll talk more about that, but the texture on the world, maybe I can delete it and show you. If I delete that, you're not really seeing much of it. But what it does is it just adds fog out here in the distance, and it allows us to imitate real-world atmosphere where things disappear into the horizon and they get kind of grayed out. And we'll talk about the effect that painters have used for centuries to indicate the world disappearing, receding into the distance, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But these are the things that are in there. The details and the world settings down here have to do with individual objects. So while the floor, for example, I can click up here in my world outliner, I can see it, I can double click on it and it'll zoom in, so I can, in this particular case it zooms out so I can see the entire thing. Player start, I can zoom in to see that. This down here is the information that pertains to the object you have selected. Its location in the world, whether it's rotated or not, what size it is, whether it's a static object or a movable object, which has to do with shadows and lighting, and we'll talk more about that. The description of it, a static mesh, the type of material that's on it. There is a base default material. It's a checkerboard. That's what's on that right there, and that's what's all set up and ready to go. And then we have some physics settings, some collision settings. That's what keeps me from falling or going through the ground when I go in and play the game. Basic lighting, basic rendering, and some basic tag and actor information, as well as some basic navigation information down here on the bottom. This is where every time you click on an object and you want to change something about it, this is where you are going to go. If you would like to move it, you can click on it and drag it around. You can do some other things, which we'll talk about in a second when we come up to these in the next video. You can either click on it to move it, or you can actually change it over here. You can see if I change that back to 0, it goes back to where it was. If I wanted to raise it up, I could say, let's make that 200, and it pulls it up. If I want to make it 100, it'll lower it back down. One interesting note about this, and this is the last thing I'll cover in this video, you'll notice that there is a like this little box that goes around the outside of that thing. And I'll lift this back up. This capsule that goes around the outside of that particular object. The player, if I were to position this thing so it was in the ground like this, when I spawned, my character would fall through the floor if I was a three-dimensional character. So if I play this as a character, I set up a first-person game, and my player start, which is always going to look just like this. It's not really a player. It's going to look like this until you go and play the game. If I were to launch the game at that point, I would fall through the floor because my collision, which is what this represents, is overlapping the collision of another object. Everything in here has collision. This has collision on it. That has collision on it. If I set it like this, the two collisions are overlapping, and what happens is the player, by default, will literally drop to the floor. You'll also see it says on here, bad size. This little flag appears on it. That usually is your indication saying you need to pull that thing back up. Pull it back up, that thing goes away. All right? And you'll get used to working with this thing and getting it set up as closely as possible. There is some snap going on here, so sometimes if you think I'm going to get it as close to the ground as possible, it actually overlaps. This would destroy my character, even though it was just one click down or one click up. So in the next video, I'm going to talk about these tools up over here. We'll talk about what these things are and how they work and how you can utilize them. We'll talk about these over here in the preview panel. And then in the last video, I'm going to talk about the content browser and where things are.